It's not that I don't want to do my part to pay for medical insurance. It's that, A, I'm a natural healer and I actually could have the capacity to work with other people around natural healing. There's no medical insurance for that because we don't need medical insurance. But B, I'm not allowed to be acknowledged in that manner. So when I do pay for the medical insurance, I need to make sure I have the right demographic profile running on whatever the crypto account is you've assigned to me at that time. See, when I was in front of the Barbara Bush Library in Houston, I understood that the Houston Police Department specifically, or rather the pension fund connected to the Houston Police Department, had their own cryptos that they worked based on the surveillance they had and based on what they got when they were able to observe and record people that were homeless, that were congregated at certain times to get resources. It's why they allow these stop and drops. Have you ever seen it? Have you ever been on the street and you're trying to get food? Or maybe you haven't had some clothes for a while? And then all of a sudden somebody shows up and they have like this nice little setup. Maybe they get the food going. Maybe they got some clothes. If you know the right place, usually sometimes it's almost like there's a schedule, but then sometimes they just show up randomly. Who ended up congregating in that place at that time? So they were there when they show up. The sweeps of the homeless are not the same down south. They have a different setup. That's what I mean. I gotta make sure I get the demographic experience indicator correct when I do my payoff. And I know you want it big. That's why you broke my mother's ankle in the spring of 2017, remember? My mother fell down the steps and her ankle got broken. She needed surgery and she needed that boot. Because somebody needed a boot. My mother ended up getting the boot and they used my mother's boot for what they needed, insurance payments. So just be honest about it. What you need is boots. Specific kind of boots. Because there are specific kinds of companies that provide those boots. Why? Why is the boot so important? Why did an entire slew of Democrats, both in the Senate and the House, sign or onto a piece of legislation that they refused to pass? Probably because somebody knew what it was. Around taxes. That ended up setting in motion a process whereby you could acquire a boot. Now you needed to test it, make sure it worked. The truth of the matter is, who is going to be wielding the actual directed energy weapon that's going to break somebody's ankle at a strategic point in time so they end up in the hospital doing what they need to do to eventually end up with that boot? And then who determines how long they wear that boot? Let me ask you something. Let's say you're a mother or even a grandmother, and you've got a daughter that has a philanthropic effort, and she's got a charity. And her charity is about making sure that people that need access to medications get that medication. What if she, because of what the family does, is able to get access to markets internationally? And that means both in terms of acquiring the medication as well as transporting the medication and then distributing the medication. Do you know how lucrative that could be for somebody with ill intentions, or how prolific it could be for somebody that wants to use that kind of systematology in their derivative setup for other kinds of corporate activity? I found this the other day. See, this is what you want. Remember when you said, come to mother? Go to your mother. Go to your mother. See, I've been confused this whole time because Ronald Reagan, as far as I know, used to call Nancy mother. It's this weird thing. Why did he call Nancy mother? Well, I don't know. If you ever get to see that audit that went on around all of those databases that were decommissioned because they had some sort of problem in the 1980s, maybe you would be able to tell me something about your understanding of what it means when you get that call to call your mother. Because I got that call. I got that call in April of 2018, and I didn't quite know why. It was, what, about a year after my mother got her ankle broken? It was a year after I had been kicked out of, a year and a month after I'd been kicked out of a shelter, after being kidnapped, after seeing two women in that shelter get their ankle broken, and then they had to get a boot. Around the same time, my mother, apparently in another part of the country, had to get a boot. And before, I witnessed a lot of other people, much younger than my mother and much younger than those women I saw, have to get boots. Why? I think it has to do with this. Hold on a second. I just want to make sure I get it right for you. On January 13th, Congress was set to vote on whether George had the right to use arms in the Persian Gulf to back up the United Nations resolution that had been passed against Hussein's aggression. There were many senators and representatives who wanted to usurp the powers of the president as commander in chief. This is a problem almost every president is forced to address. George feels strongly there are many times that the president must be able to act and not have his arms tied behind his back. In the end, after much debate and many dire predictions of hundreds of Americans killed in a ground war, the House and the Senate passed a joint resolution backing George. Regrettably, much of the Democratic leadership fought and voted against it. Can you imagine what Saddam Hussein's gleeful reaction would have been if Congress had not supported the president? The UN resolution gave Hussein until January 15th to get his troops out of Kuwait. The last hope for peace came when Javier Perez de Cuellar, the UN General Secretary, went to Iraq. Again, failure. Saddam was rude to the Secretary General and kept him waiting for 4 hours. I remember feeling so frightened for our men and women who were there and for all the civilians in Iraq. George felt that if Saddam Hussein were to die, people would dance in the streets as they had in Romania when Ceausescu fell. All during this time, we invited dear friends up to Camp David, people who had no agenda and with whom George could relax. George mostly worked, but the moments of exercise and rest helped. Betsy and Spike Hemingway came one weekend, along with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Maria Shriver, their 13-month-old daughter Margaret, and a nanny. Doro and her children and Margaret and her children came also, along with Marshall's close friend and playmate, Abigail Meyer. She's naming names, I'm just letting you know. I know it sounds like a crowd, but Camp David can handle it. It was tremendous fun as everyone in the group was very competitive and willing to try just about anything. Maybe just a little too willing. After a great snow, everybody got out the toboggans, saucers, and sleds. It was so much fun that the unused sleds were at a premium. After church on Sunday, Betsy and I hurried and changed our clothes and raced out so we could get some sledding in before the crowd hit. I wrote, this is her recounting her writing. I jumped on the saucer and was the first down. During the night, there had been a little thaw and then a big freeze. The hill had become thick ice, and the ride was so different. I went spinning around and around so fast that I can still feel the fear that I felt. I knew that I should fall off, but I just could not seem to let go. Luckily, I hit a tree with both my legs and not my head, which might easily have happened. I was shaky, but not hurt, I felt. George had just come out on Aspen Terrace and was yelling, "Bail out! Bail out!" And he and the agents rushed down that slippery hill. I said I could walk up, but was quickly forced to lie on a toboggan, and they pulled me up. That feeling of being out of control is the worst. The doctor insisted that I go to Hagerstown and be x-rayed. As Betsy and I were leaving in the ambulance, we saw George, Arnold, Spike, and Maria, and all the grandchildren sleighing. They were smart enough to bail out. The x-ray showed that I had a thin fracture of the fibula. Minor, but a bore. Poor Arnold. For weeks afterward, I claimed in my speeches that the last thing I heard before crashing was Arnold yelling, "Break a leg!" And therefore I was never going to invite an actor for the weekend again. Then she goes into her notes on January 16th. I've already picked up where she left off.